was actually moved to the main room, so I thought that would happen with mine too, because normally when the conference empties out, people are invited to go back to the main foyer, and then we get into a big panel discussion instead, so I'm pleasantly surprised. So where should we move the chairs? Is this okay for you?
Yeah, you can sit in a circle.
Okay.
It's good.
Maybe you could bring your chair in a little bit more so make it more circular. Well, I will start.
And if you want to ask something, you can give the microphone to the other. Yeah.
Okay. Let me start us off, and then we're going to go into an interactive slot. So if I was to sit here just now, that's okay?
Oh, it's okay. You can stand and sit.
All right.
What you like?
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending. And my name is Helenique Argeru. I'm a clinical psychologist for 22 years or so. Was recently moving into peak performance training, so I organize conferences for women. And I work also in schools as a drum therapist. I used my creative side to learn the percussive arts many years ago. And I became fascinated by neuroscience and how it is affecting our entire system to be exposed to rhythm, and the impact of not being exposed to nature and natural rhythms, and how that affects education and children's development. So I do a lot of drum workshops and drum projects, and I have simultaneously become really interested, as I said, in neuroscience and the whole meeting of modern science with ancient wisdom. So a lot of this talk today is about looking really at this incredible power that we all have inside of us to become alchemists, to actually transform from many difficulties or challenges in our lives, and to grow, expand, and reach our fullest potential. I happen to be from the island of Cyprus. My parents are born there, but I grew up in South Africa. And I was exposed to a very interesting paradigm shift in South Africa. So I really experienced transformation in many different ways. But all the while was very fascinated by the ancient Greek wisdom and mythology from ancient Greece. And then later on by many different cultures and philosophies and spiritual traditions from around the world. And became really interested in how they all meet up. What is the universal truth in life that all cultures, all people, all traditions have ended up discovering, and how can we learn from that still today? So this is what the talk is about today, the power of transformation that really, even in ancient times, was spoken about by Aristotle and Socrates as the real point of life. So the interesting word that Aristotle used to explain this idea was the enteleki, and the ancient derivative for this word comes from the word telos, T-E-L-O-S. You might see it at the end of a classic movie. They'll scroll up the credits at the end, a black and white movie, and they might say T-E-L-O-S, telos. It means the end. And so the word enteleki for Aristotle meant the completion of a life. And he proposed that every single one of us has within us already the acorn that will become the tree. And in this acorn is everything we really need. Once it's planted with good sunlight, water, attention, care, and love, and the right kind of luck of circumstance, this tree can grow into a the seed could grow into a fully fledged tree. What makes some trees grow greater than others? What really propels us to grow? These are all the great questions in psychology that we're going to look into today. When we look a little bit further on in history, we see that many psychologists have said things very similar to this. Jung spoke a lot about the process of what he called individuation, how we begin our lives as a kind of nurture and nature debate around whether we get told what to do versus we bring our own temperament to life. And really, how do we develop? Is it our own making? Is it the world? Is it the environment that tells us? And pretty much the debate ended up with Jung saying, well, yes, of course, we do have this natural DNA, we are all unique, and yes, we do get very influenced by our environment. I think neuroscience is confirming nowadays that we are more influenced by our parents and our environment and our family than anything else. So a lot of behavior is actually learned. But Jung said we actually each have an individual, special, unique process to go through, and that he called individuation. And he said that really it reaches its peak when we also reach our fullest potential. So really it is quite useful to see that even Aristotle, much like Socrates, who also talked about knowing the self, is echoing again through the words and the wisdom of Jung as a modern psychoanalyst who says, yes, we do need to complete our lives and actualize, become our fullest potential. Einstein said something really great, which I want to lead us into now as well on the subject. He said, to reinvent something, all you need is a pile of junk and a little bit of imagination. And I think this quote is a great place to start, because it really tells us that there is a way of having the conversation about life transformation and considering many things that we are faced with as junk. But when we put our imagination to that, we can actually really invent something incredible. And our life is very much like that. It's made up, obviously, of lots of great things, not just junk and throwaways or leftovers, but really a lot of what we are dealing with is gone today. We've lived our past. It's thrown away. The past is already gone. It's in the memory. And so we don't necessarily have access to all these incredible things from our past continuously. We really just have access to this moment and this power of our vision. And so today there's a chance to also then understand that as human beings, for us to complete this life, to actualize, to really use our external environments and to become innovative, we need to learn this power of the imagination, and we need to know how to apply it very well. I see in my audience here people that are probably very experienced at what I'm saying, and you've had your own life journey, which I'm sure we can glean lots of wisdom from, and we'll do that in a moment, since we have a full hour to explore together. So when we look at that power of our own intention, our own vision, our own imagination, applying it to all the challenges, to all the difficulties, to all the struggle that we might experience in life, our pain, our suffering, and yes, also to all the positive aspects of life, we can actually transform incredibly. So let's go back a few steps and get to some consensus. There's a very interesting piece of theory that talks about 4 primal needs that we all have as human beings. And there is an interesting tension that's going on between these needs. And in my mind, they are primal. They are needs that we try to get met in childhood. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes not. Even if we do, we have a continuing need in life to keep meeting these needs. Because of the tension, we don't ever really get to be completely satisfied forever. We have to return to meeting these needs. What are they? If you could sum up the basic drives that you have in your life, and you could summarize what it is that you're really seeking, maybe you could distill it into these 4 qualities, these 4 primal needs. The first one is the need for security. We all need to feel safe, and we have, as very small babies in our mother's arms, the need to know that the world is a safe place. And this is obviously in some people entirely neglected, and in others partially neglected, and in most of us that live with a healthy parent, we might have this need met for periods of time, but still we have moments where we again need to be reassured that the world is a safe place. The second primal need we have is the need for change. And this need for change is what creates the tension with the first need, because as much as we all would love to be in a safe world, we would get bored to death, right? if every single day is always the same kind of safe. So at some point you need to go on a holiday, or at some point you want to change your career, or you want to have a child, or you decide this relationship's not for you. You actually need to grow, expand, and find maybe some time on your own, and then discover another relationship, or maybe not. You are always driving towards some kind of place where you have choice. And so this is the second need, the need for change, or the need to exercise your choice. So primal need number 1 with primal need number 2, they come into an interesting dance at times. When we get too safe, we create some change. When there's too much change, we look for a nice home base, a place of safety. The third primal need is the need for significance. And this is a very interesting one, because I think in the time we live amongst a human species that is driven to meet this need daily on the internet, Facebooks, LinkedIn's. The whole entire process of being successful in your work nowadays requires you to present and confirm your significance, that you have purpose, that others recognize you are valuable, important, that you have credibility, that you are present, that you are significant. And the amount of likes and the amount of follows means this is how significant you've become. So this is a great testimony to the fact that we have, as human beings, a strong need to know that we are valuable, that we are special, we are considered, and we have worth. Somehow we need to reassure that in our external environment. The fourth need, again, that creates some tension between this third one of significance is the fourth one. And maybe you can guess, what have I not mentioned yet? Yeah, fourth need is this deep connection and love. And this is also something that we continuously affirm and confirm for ourselves. We can get love from our mothers for our entire life, but somehow it's still not enough. Or maybe it's enough in some sense, but we seek the love of a partner, we seek the love of a child, we seek the love of our teachers, we seek the love of friends. And in any given moment, we are actually, in some people more than others, really, really needing connection. And some say this is the most important need to meet in our time, our epic time in history now, is that many people are thirsty, deprived, really neglected in terms of this deep connection. The intimacy that we had in personal relationships is changing in the world, and so this fourth need becomes really significant. So this talk was something I even adapted to business professionals who were working in their professions and looking at the ways that you could meet these four needs if you are developing a product or a service. How you do good business in the world, how you make great work happen, is to know that you are dealing with people outside of you every single day. Every single client has one of these needs at any given moment. And it's really fascinating to see very specifically businesses that have designed their product, their service, to meet one of these specific needs. For example, an insurance company for the first one, for security and safety, an adventure company, these bungee jumping off waterfall type experiences that people crave at some point in their life is a very good example of the second, the need for change, the need to exercise personal choice. The need for significance, this limousine company that takes you off to a wedding and you feel so important on that day, or a boutique hotel that leaves little chocolates on your pillow when you arrive back from the buffet. And this love and connection where, there are so many different ways where we can experience a sense of connection. So you even have exclusive networking groups, and you have VIP lists that you can belong to, and you really get the sense that human beings are satisfied when one of these four needs are being met. So what is this powerful way that all of us can meet these needs and can actually navigate through this labyrinth of life, meeting all these different needs? We still encounter great challenges where maybe because of 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these needs, we feel a great lack or a great loss, or we feel a demise, something happens in our life, and we are faced with something we didn't expect, an illness, maybe a loss, maybe a demotion, maybe a dream didn't come true, and we are experiencing any number of challenges. Maybe we can brainstorm a few here that we have been through as people in our own lives, if you're willing to do that. I'll maybe start the ball rolling and saying, I've been an immigrant, so that was a really great challenge in my life, being somebody who had to move from Zimbabwe to South Africa, and then from South Africa I chose to move to Cyprus, and from Cyprus I've now moved here. And that's a very good example. So people who are immigrants or refugees are in very specific crisis, and that's a great challenge for them. Anything else that anybody else would like to add in? What other challenges have we been through as a group? What have we triumphed through? Depression, anyone?
Challenge?
Challenge, yeah.
I've been working on a cruise ship for 9 months as a physiotherapist with one of my first jobs.
Yeah.
And that was a real challenge because I had to go on my own, fly to Miami and find my way to the ship and everything, and start up as the only physio on the ship with 1,000 people, 1 doctor and 2 nurses, and there was no Dutch person on board, so I had to speak English and German, and everything was totally new, but really nice, a very nice challenge and a very good experience.
Excellent, excellent.
After over 30 years working in the civil service in England, I had the boss from hell and realised I'd got to leave and I couldn't carry on doing that.
Yeah.
And I completely changed my job and became an entrepreneur
Wow, big
at
change.
54.
Wow, congratulations on that. Does anybody else want to share a challenge that they've triumphed through, or maybe they don't think they've triumphed, but we see you standing and so we think you have?
No.
Do you have anything you want to share?
No, but I have a question about your drumming.
That's why.
I
Wanted to know that. Oh, I'm so sorry. That was not part of today, but I would love to. I would love to invite you another time to learn more about my drumming.
Yes, but
And the neuroscience.
the theoretical
Okay, fantastic.
background.
So how about we do a little 10 minutes at the end on that, because we have a whole hour. And whoever wants to stay can do that, and then whoever wants to leave and be part of something else can do that too. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Splendid.
Great, okay. But I am going to tell you that I think drumming is one of the most powerful ways of accelerating an alchemical process. And it's a very interesting thing that happens, that you can start to transform thought into action, and the action creates a vibrational sound. And that vibrational sound can actually alter the vibration in the room. So it's still a bit of alchemy. So maybe I'm talking.
Some scientific evidence.
Yes, there's lots. I will rattle it off in a second.
I'm curious.
So, well, in a few minutes, rather. So wonderful. It's so nice to have someone so interested in that. So there's really this great example that we've got here of changing career, of moving to a foreign land, opening up a new job, a new profile as a person, being exposed to many new things. This strong need for seeking knowledge and scientific evidence is also a really interesting way that we get inspired by things to grow and expand. And so many challenges really take us into this kind of evolution, growth, expansion. But really there's a very interesting quote by Jung that says again that the tree does not grow until the roots reach down to hell. And he says it very purposefully. And so my question to you now is, have you ever experienced something that's a little bit like hell? Not just a challenge that made you grow and you felt all nice about it, but something that really felt very difficult to go through. Anyone?
Yes, my husband got brain damage 18 years ago after a shingle infection in his neck. And from one day to the other he was totally knocked out by extreme fever and in hospital on the intensive care. And I was being told we don't know if he would survive. That was
How is he
really,
now?
still a problem. Elsewise, it's still a big problem. So it changed our life completely.
Dramatically.
Yeah, completely, totally unexpected.
Well, so this is a real thing. I'm not just dramatizing and making a theatre of life. This is true. We go through moments where we are forced to face something that feels like hell.
But because of that, I've made a lot of changes in life, and partly that's why I'm here, because I have a different career step. I'm working with Anton Phillips, who looks for the intrinsic motivation of people.
Wonderful.
As a method how to get that to the surface, and that way I'm helping to promote his way of thinking, together with Frank, who is a coach, a certified coach for him.
Great, it's lovely to have you both. I know his work well. A good friend of mine knows his work very well as well, and was introducing me to his work not so recently, but a while ago. So you mentioned something really important, really, where we are faced with something so difficult that we have to develop a whole new part of ourselves. And this is really shown in a lot of symbolism, actually, in Indian philosophy, in Indian thought. There is the symbol of the lotus that grows out of the mud. And in ancient alchemical schools, there was again the teaching of how very specific individuals had the wisdom, and they were initiated, to be able to transform the mud into gold. And there was a lot of debate, is that even possible? Can that really happen? And I think when you tell us about your experience, and I share some greater dark times in my life, or any of you was to share some of your darkness with us here, we would know that there are these moments in life that feel like we're in the mud, right? And we don't have a clear way of knowing that we're going to make it through, that we're going to be able to blossom, and we're going to be able to reach some sunlight and grow up onto the surface of the water. Sometimes we really are very confused. And a tree doesn't think about maybe how much it's going to grow, it just is, and it just grows depending on what the environment is providing. But it does have its roots deep down in the darkness, and it reaches up into the sky and actually connects with an entirely opposite experience or environment above the ground. It's now up into the light. And so this is a great symbolism for us to follow, and to know that we really are capable of transforming ourselves from mud into gold. And sometimes there's a great price. We work very hard to do that. How was it for you to transform careers? You moved from a very difficult, unknown place and reached somewhere new, right? So when we have this process to go through, there's a way that I would like to suggest or explain it to you in 3 specific steps. And I wanted to give these out today as a suggestion of how we do this inner alchemy in life. So I wanted to read to you this really interesting quote by a man called Claude Bristol, who says, "One secures the gold of the spirit when one finds himself." So this golden place, this place of light, this tree that grows, this lotus that rises, is an experience of being connected to all that is positive, all that is victorious, all that is positively intending, all in us and around us that grows towards the light, symbolically speaking, is what can become golden. The effort itself is something that is of a greater value than no effort at all. I don't mean the sense of being, which is a spiritual understanding of no effort at all. I mean not learning through your experience and not triumphing, not trying to succeed. So this gold that we can secure in our own spirit comes from when we truly find ourselves, and we find ourselves through this triumph in the darkest moments, learning to grow up and move through an experience, move through the challenge, and actually master these 3 different areas. So the first one I wanted to talk about is innocence. There is a part of us that is entirely pure and innocent, and it is a part of us that in psychotherapeutic language we work a lot with as the inner child. Some people refer to it as the wounded self or the body memory. A lot of alternative therapists talk about that as the wounded self or the wounding in the self. So when we go through a tough time, or when we've been through tough times in life, we have a very specific memory of that, experiential memory of that. And it sits very deep down in the mud. And unless we heal that, and unless we bring it up into the light, it creates a little bit of mold, and it festers. And sometimes it outright prevents, or at least interferes with our ability to grow. Some people have very specific experiences that have stopped them from experiencing themselves as innocent or pure in any way. So they don't have access to that part of themselves because of many difficult experiences. And this might make it very complicated for them to rise up and experience this kind of power of growing into the light. The second area we need to master is the experience of the essence, is to know the essence of our being. And a lot of spiritual traditions teach this in many beautifully diverse ways. We have all kinds of religions that propose ways of doing that, either through a faith type of iconoclast God or being that they believe brings this power to them to understand the essence, to remind them of this essence, and in some other practices through your own mental, emotional balancing techniques, meditation and or awareness training, you can reach this sense of essence. And to learn to identify oneself, to feel your essence regularly, and to know the truth of that in your being is the second stage to master. And the third one is really an interesting area where I think very few people have mastered, and so it's really always an aspiration for many of us to learn to master this area of our magnificence. And this is where we tie this all back in with Aristotle and Jung and many others who have spoken about this life journey as a process where you can reach completion. So what does it mean to master your magnificence? It means to be able to know the truth of your being, to know how to clean out all your junk. Remember we spoke about Einstein, and how to deal with all your difficult stuff, all the skills you haven't learned, to start learning some of the things that you maybe have missed out on, to start forgiving people, to start letting go of resentment and anger, frustration, to learn how to work through emotions that are very difficult, and to get in touch with this innocent part of us, the child in us that was confused by the way the world was, maybe when we were very young, and decided certain things about life, and then lived by that, so the program we have to be able to clean through all of that. And then to know the essence, like to know the essence of your being, to visit that regularly. And then to move, lastly, into this greater magnificence of connecting with all that is beyond us. And to be in that realm of magnificence, to know that there is a greater, higher order in the universe. And to know one's place in that is to be able to access this really great power of being able to expand and become the greatest tree that you can ever be, the state of actualization. So all of this for me is what I wanted to share with you today as the real power of reinvention, and that for each one of us, whenever we are faced with difficulties, whenever the outside environment is challenging us, there is this really deep and powerful skill that we have built into us to transform situations and to learn to grow through the mud up into the light. And to do that, we need to remember how to connect with our own innocence, to move into the essence of our being, and then to know how to work into this realm of the magnificence. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. There's a chance to have some questions, but before we do that, maybe we can give the space to people to share anything that they want to share. If there's anything you want to say about any of this, maybe your own wisdom that you learned, like the biggest breakthrough that you had in your life, or the biggest life challenge you had, and what it taught you. Maybe you don't have to share a whole story about it. You could just share with us what you learned out of one of your greatest challenges. Your personal truth. Anybody interested to share? Maybe we can send the mic around to hear people's wisdom in the group. You can't get away from it. Wisdom.
So definitely one of the worst days of my life. My mother's sister, my aunt, was my godmother, and she lived in the north of England, and she didn't have any children. She got married, but she didn't have any children, so I was her next of kin, and she was my godmother. And I was working, and I had to go up to near where she lived when I was working, and my boss was the boss from hell. So I'd had a horrible day, and then I had a horrible journey, and then I got to my hotel, and my husband rang and says, this hospital's been trying to get hold of you, can you contact them? And I contacted them, and they said, your aunt is with us, and we need to talk to you. So it's never a good thing, it's not going to be good news. And so I said, well, can I come tomorrow? I'm really very tired. And they said, no, we won't see you tonight. So this is going to be really bad news. So I went to see them, and the doctor sat me down and said, your aunt came to us with this sort of skin infection, but actually there's something wrong with her circulation, and we would have to remove one of her legs. But also she has dementia, and we've got to decide whether it's worth doing. And they were coming to me to make the decision, did they just do palliative care and let her go, or did I want her to be operated on? You want to be in a better place when you make that kind of decision, but sometimes you don't get that option. You've got to make the decision. And it was just so, in a way it was so hard. My heart said, don't let her have that operation, we've got to let her go. But to, if you like, put a death sentence on somebody is really very difficult. Yeah. And I felt so alone in that moment of making that decision. But I thought, this is my godmother, and she was there for me at the beginning of my life, and I need to be here for her at the end of her life. And so, out of that horrible day, I think I found the strength to make that decision and to allow her to go. But, that's not an easy thing to do. That is just a hard thing. And after it, I realised I had to learn to forgive myself. To forgive myself for making that decision. Even though it was the right decision, it still felt like something I had to forgive myself for doing.
Wow. So you learned something about life.
I did, yeah. Yeah, I learned, as I say, she was there at the beginning of my life when my mother was too ill to look after me. She was there and she looked after me. And in that circularity, I had to be there for her at the end of that. So it felt like an amazing, if you like, it was a gift to be able to do that for her.
Absolutely.
But it was a very difficult gift.
Yeah. And nobody else could probably have done that, given that she had exchanged with you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really beautiful.
Very, very tough place.
Yeah, well, it's difficult for me because my English is far from perfect.
Would you like to share in Dutch?
I can help.
Well,
You can translate.
I'll do my best. I think one of the most important things that I learned in my long life is that people should focus on their intrinsic motivation. And that means we all must act. We all must make decisions. And the question is, based on what? And I've learned the last 5 years, due to a meeting with Mr. Anton Philips, that you mentioned, that there is a system what we call SIMA, of identifying motivated abilities, that we should focus on wondering which subjects are important for us, under which circumstances we thrive, what are the motivated skills we all have, which role do we play with respect to colleagues and people who are leaders, and last but not least, what are the basic drives? There are 5 elements. And as a matter of fact, I'm a clinical psychologist as well, so we are colleagues, and I try to be a coach for people who have questions about those things, and that's what I learned, to focus on those 5 elements. And we do that by let them write about activities in the past based on pleasure and success. So that's my short contribution to this meeting.
Oh, it's always so challenging when you are in the room and you get such thing for your mom. So I will try. Your personal wisdom.
Yeah, what did you learn so far in life?
I'm still learning. And what I learned for me is that your inner child, no, not your inner self is good as it is. And not only mine is good, yours as well. Yours as well. You are created from love, otherwise you're not here. So I'm okay, you're okay. And what gives me peace is that I can acknowledge another in being good as how you are. And I think that's where it has to start. Love yourself and give love to others, or kindness, or friends. Give meaning to another.
Thank you so much.
Talking about challenges.
Can you sit over there? Okay. Close.
Talking about challenges, and you mentioned it, your darkest moment in hell. Well, I didn't see it as hell, but what was really a tough period in my life was my illness, diagnosed with breast cancer. But it was tough, and but on the other hand, there was no choice. I mean, I could wipe with my white flag and say, okay, fine, this is it, this is the end. But it was a challenge to go through this period, and I was lucky that I had some support, well, a lot of support from my family and also my friends. So that was the environment which makes it a bit secure for me. And what I learned from it was that it was quite simple to me, actually. There's always light at the end of the tunnel. And I don't know how it works, but there was this really strong feeling from the inside. And I remember that during the first consult with my surgeon, I was really very practical. I said, okay, this is diagnosed, I'm not going to be very dramatic about it. What's the plan? And I really wanted to have a plan. And so very pragmatic. And I will never forget it, but I said something to him, which was the drive for me to go through this period. And that was, the only thing I really want, and which will be my drive during this period, is that I want to see my children grow. You know, they were only 15 and 10 years old. And I had also some, I already met some neighbors, and also my mother, who were big examples for me, very powerful women. So I don't say it was easy, but I had the strength to go through it. And the day of the operation is in fact my second birthday. So I see it as my second birthday. So for 5 years now I have 2 birthdays. And actually I organized a party last October where Hague also was, to just really celebrate it. Yeah, and for some people that was really, when I said it to him, invited people, I felt that some of them say, hey, you're going to celebrate it. This is a very serious subject, because on the other, there was also another goal. I wanted to, it was kind of a benefit also on the other hand. So I celebrated my second birthday, and I collected some money for Pink Ribbon in this case. But I've noticed that for some people that was a little bit like, how can you do it? But that is my way of handling it. So,
Wow.
yeah, and then my message to mainly to women is that you just have to know how strong you are. If you are, if you think that you are in your darkest moments, you will also hopefully see that you will have the strength to go through it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing, Hague. Great. Wow. So, something about life and death, and how we get given the chance sometimes to decide about life and death. And 5 really important things. I think what stands out from what you share so much is the real intrinsic drive that we have in us. So important to know what that is. You spoke about love and really being able to really know that what you are inside is enough, that it's good. And then you shared with us really also about knowing that there is a strength to survive no matter what we're going through, and that you got in touch with that. So that was really powerful, and I want to honor you all for being here with me and being willing to share what you did. Thank you for that. And we can ask any questions now, or if you like, we can move to this other subject that my colleague's name,
Frank.
what that Frank has suggested we speak more about. Is there any question until now? No? No, great. So we've all opened and closed in a circle together. So Frank, tell me exactly what it is that you wanted to know, because there's a lot of information that's processable here, and then other information that would probably be better to do another time, because there's some stats and different things that I would need to have in front of me to answer really.
I'm curious
Details.
about the scientific
Aspect of it, yeah.
basis.
Well, I'll tell you a few things that really surprised me, and that brought me to the place I am now, where after 25 years I've been exploring both whatever theory I could find and whatever was written about it out there, where at the time when I started was very little. So I started a website called DramaWare, and I wrote whatever I could find, I researched whatever I could find, and wrote a lot of content. And at that time it was a lot of cultural information and a lot of historical, archaeological information with lots of gaps in it, because the story goes that people never really considered percussion as a serious form of music. It was considered to be a way of keeping time. But if you go a little deeper into that idea, you can see that time is really a very complex cognitive process, understanding time and working through time, and children that struggle with difficulties have problems with time. Creative people were in a very, bending time type way. So we could say that time comes a little bit more from the right hemisphere of the brain interacting with the left, as opposed to being a very systematic thing. It's actually quite organic, but it's also a lot of what scientists say an illusion. So the measurement of time, the keeping of time, is actually quite an interesting subject. So an instrument that's doing that is also then, in my mind, quite an interesting instrument. So what you find, however, is that because of that fact, a lot of other instruments were regarded much more highly because they were bringing melody into the picture. They were with strings that were actually vibrating at different frequencies, so there was a lot more study and development around all these other instruments. But really, since the beginning of time, the drum existed, and the first drum was ever found up in Turkey, what is now called Turkey, a place called Katalyuk, which is actually the first drum of all. Before all other drums appeared in Africa, this first drum arrived, and it was shaped like the device that was used by women in the kitchen to sift wheat. So there's a lot of investigation or suspicion that the drum with a skin placed on the back of it, as opposed to a sift that sifts through the flour, might have been developed by women as an instrument for them to use to worship the moon and to replicate the menstrual cycle. And in fact, there's some theories that say that the drum was used between the dark phase of the moon up to the new phase of the moon in paganistic cultures by women to keep us awake in the time of the darkness. So when there was no light, they would start to play the drum, and then when the new moon arrived, there was a bit more light, so they would play the drum between the dark moon and the new moon in order to keep the mind aware and awake. This is what you find, is little bits of anecdotal history. Now we have systems in neuroscience and neuropsychology that are able to measure the brain in real time. So before we only had MRIs, so we could only really look at brain scans from the past. We wouldn't be able to look at them in real time now. So the scans from before could show someone having had a musical experience, and then you measure the brain waves, and then you look at the brain waves and say, okay, this is the effect after listening to music. But it's been very difficult to research percussion because percussion disturbs the imaging so much. So they did some really interesting MRIs with piano keyboards for jazz musicians, and they found that the skill of musical improvisation is one of the most profound and one of the most developed activities that a human being can engage in, which tells us then that the ability to compose while you are playing a practiced piece of music requires both the left hemisphere, predominantly the left. It's a bit of a simplification, I know, to say left and right, but for sake of discussion. The cognitive skills, analytical skills, order system is all from the left, and the creative, the improvisation, the auditory, the creative expression is coming more from the right. When these two come together, the brain is in its most activated state. And so very few people have mastered this ability. Jazz musicians are one of those types of people. For a long time, this was the kind of information that was like pearls of wisdom, little bits of it, coming through. But really, now there is a very interesting institute in America, for example, that I work with for children that have sensitivities. Not really looking at diagnosis per se, but you could say ADD, anxiety, autism. Most of the research was done on autistic children by a man who himself had ADHD and became a really professional drummer. And he did so as a matter of survival, because his mind and his energy was constantly out of his body. He learned in his life to practice drumming. He was attracted to it so much that he brought himself into contact with percussion repeatedly in his life at different phases, and eventually became really good at it, and got to the stage of being able to play up to 6 or 8 beats per second. And he's considered a genius in the field, and I followed his work for 15 years. It's almost 20 years of research now that I've followed him, but he's actually done 30 decades of research. And it all started with him playing percussion himself to concentrate his mind and to bring his energy back into his body. Because a lot of children that struggle with hyperactivity or who have one of the 6 types of ADD, it doesn't have to be diagnosable, are just constantly unable to integrate their sensory system. They just have a lot of information that they keep experiencing, and they can't just ground their energy. Their roots are not coming down, maybe, as an example of our metaphor from before. So he is a great example of a person who has shown a life of drumming as a way of being able to bring back his own attention. But in so doing, he met many interesting urban drummers, and then he met some traditional Afro-Cuban drummers as well, and he got initiated, I would say, or he got exposed to a very specific way of observing somebody while he's playing. And there are very specific ways that the brain starts to respond to the sound, or to the sight, or to the touch, or to the taste, or to the movement of anything in the environment. But if you look specifically at sound, you can see that there is a very interesting relationship between the concentration and whatever we are experiencing on one of the sensory systems. In meditation, we talk about this as well, the sensory body. So the ears, the sight, you close your eyes so that you're not distracted, you're in silence, but you also have to keep ignoring sound. But if you were to study how the brain is reacting to sound, and if you were to create a sound repeatedly for 6 impulses or 6 pulses in 1 second, let's say you move it up to 8, that's quite a lot. That's like a drum roll. That's like the flickering of the wings of a butterfly that we can't even register because it's too fast, right? But in drum language, you can play that, and we call that a roll. So it's like like in tabla music, in Indian percussion. They will sing out that rhythm, and they will play up to that amount per second sometimes, and then they will keep the pulse. So when you watch the brain in response to that, and this is how he did most of his research to start off with, and he wasn't the first to study sound, there were many before him, but he was the first to study this particular principle, which he did intuitively to start off with, because he's quite a genius in his own right. But as we know, he needed to find a way to explain this genius to the world, and he had to manage and control his own impulses first to be able to do that. So he's an example of this intelligence, this rhythmic intelligence, I call it, or rhythmic wisdom. And then he's learned to develop a method, and this is the method I use with a lot of children and families now. And the method is basically studying over years the behavioral pattern that is changing due to what the brain is registering from the sound. And after watching and documenting many autistic children whose parents would keep calling him back to go and play again, because every time he left, the child's behavior changed significantly, and at times dramatically, in that they were much more social, they would make eye contact with the parent, they would be a lot less agitated, their rituals would slow down, they would become less frequent. And over years of studying that, he got funded by the Autistic Association of America. He finally had enough evidence to proclaim that a very specific process of entrainment is happening. And the entrainment process is the big discovery for me about drumming that's convinced me that this is something to go deeper in. And entrainment explains the principle of a pendulum. Are you following me in all the English as I speak so fast?
I understand everything.
Excellent. Because it's like a transmission to you today.
As a matter of fact, I have to apologize, but we have another session at 5 o'clock.
Let's leave it there.
That's really difficult for me.
I know how to reach you by mail. Because
we can have a chat.
We
We can have a chat, or we can even get on Skype. I don't mind.
Yes.
sharing any of my
Yeah.
resources.
It's
with you.
time. It's 5 o'clock.
And we can leave it there. But this is the principle of entrainment
Okay.
through the pendulum. That the brain is one aspect, the ball bearing,
Yeah.
and the other ball bearing is the rhythm. So the brain starts to listen to the rhythm. And before 12 minutes is the cutoff time. But there's a lot of
Very, very
changing
interesting.
stuff, right?
I had a
It
good
starts
band
to
and I
entrain.
like drumming, so that's-
Excellent. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bedankt. hè.
Succes.
You have a card or something?
You are the next speaker?
No, but yeah, I was wondering if the next session was going to occur, but I can also say hello.
Thank you so much. Anybody who wants to be connected, I have these here. If you would like to know more, just say
Thanks ever so much.
Yeah, whatever you are. And if you are a woman with a piece of truth, please tell
Oh,
me.
do I get the other one? I got that one.
Okay,
Or
for
the
the
also, or you're out of that one now?
I might have one more.
You know, when you said entrainment, is that like EFT or EMDR?
EFT and EMDR, interestingly enough, are based on something else called bilateral symmetry.
Right, you break it up. And so it's just because I caught the tail end of what you were saying.
Emotional freedom technique is the one.
Yeah.
And just remind me, is that tapping? Yeah, tapping is
That's
different.
EFT.
Yeah, emotional freedom technique is where they do the bilateral symmetry. There's certain rhythms that can do what EMDR is.
Right, because I done
But there's
EMDR.
something about sound. This is going into another area totally.
The
So one
only
is
reason
movement.
why is EMDR, I've seen it done two ways, which is follow the finger or the sound with the headset. And the EFT is right. But anyway,
What
we
is the
talked
next?
about
What is the
pendulum.
next session?
Here is
What was it that have we met before?
I think we have. I've been to a number of WEFs, so were you here last year?
Yeah, just last year.
Well, I was here last year. Yeah. Well, I'm interested because I've done some shamanic work, and of course with the shamans and
Yeah.
the drumming, so